welcome. This evening, Andrew Wood's going to be giving us a chat on his experiences at Pocklington last year. Andrew will obviously give his history and so on, but basically went solo in the 1980s, big gap due to the usual problems of families and all the rest of it, and career, and started gliding again about 18 months ago or last year, and he's got himself solo again, and used the club facilities to take the Perkoz down south and experience competitions, which, as we've been discussing this afternoon, is really a terrific way of gaining experience. So he wrote a diary, which I thought was excellent during the comp, and I must admit I read it every day. And so Andrew very kindly agreed to do a talk on his experiences. And Brian, who came second in the comp, will also chip in as appropriate and present a different perspective of the competition. And so, rather than me ramble on, off you go, mate.
Okay, thanks very much, Sant. As Sant said, I rejoined the club after a long gap, and to sort of build on the flying that I'd done previously, took the opportunity to take part in the two-seater competition at Pocklington. Has that changed? Yes, it has. So the plan, what I'm going to do is run through a bit of my bit of background to my flying, bit of history of my involvement with the club, the flying I've done both here and elsewhere, and look at why I wanted to do the competition. Move on to the competition itself, some of the stuff that I learned from it. There we go, that's better. We'll do it the old way. This is a copy of first page of my father's logbook from 1952. In 1952, he was between school and university. He was going off to study aeronautical engineering at Glasgow University. Thought it would be useful to do some practical experience of flying. So took the opportunity to come and do a course with the then Scottish Gliding Union, which was based at Balado, just the other side of the motorway, obviously. And probably all seen in the bar, the advert for the courses. It was one of these that he did. And this is his sum total of experience of a week's flying. Basically, on that course, he did 12 launches in a T21 for 30 minutes, and then converted onto the single-seat SG38. And if this works for those of you who are not familiar with the SG38, it's one of those. You basically get dragged along by the winch cable on the ground at first as a slide, and then a low hop, and then finally, the ultimate, a high hop for a 30-second flight to get your A certificate. And he achieved that right at the end of the course. Just a couple of other things in his logbook that might be of vague interest. You'll note, is that gone? I don't know whether you can read it. Time in the air measured down to the nearest second, not minutes, seconds. And the other thing is, of the launch methods offered, rocket assisted was one. As far as I'm aware, the SGU has never done that, but it strikes me as the sort of thing that one dark night somebody might have thought, let's get a glider out and stick a rocket on it. And that's probably where that came from. He didn't actually go on and do any further gliding, but instead went on to join the aeronautical industry and got involved in flight testing in this beastie, which, for those of you who don't know, it's a Scottish Aviation Twin Pioneer built through at Prestwick. He left the industry not long after the production of that finished and changed careers completely. But one of his responsibilities was this, an Auster Autocrat, for those who won't recognize it. It was maintained in flying condition by his employers, and he managed to get the chance for me to take a flight in it. It was probably about 10, something like that. I can still remember that as being something completely unique. I'd never done anything like that before. I still remember the noise and this sort of as we banked and turned and all the rest of it. And I was particularly impressed by the fact that the pilot had been a World War II Lancaster pilot, which as a small boy at that time made a big impression. My father didn't do any further flying other than the odd trip in the Ulster, and he did encourage the family to take an interest in matters aeronautical, and I ended up joining the Air Scouts, and one of our camps was in the Borders near Millfield, where Borders Gliding Club was based, and at one of our camps we managed 3 flights in a T-21, 3 circuits. Now, when I came to get my own logbook in due course, I filled that in as 15 minutes prior experience, which those of you I think who've flown a T-21 in a circuit will probably feel a bit optimistic. But anyway, that was it. I carried on taking interest. That's just another shot of the T-21. And then in due course, like him, between school and university, I came along to Portmoak and did a week's course with the Scottish Gliding Union. At that point, was flying the K-13 and the K-13, 2 K-13s, and the club had a Boschen as well. Unlike my father, I continued with the club, joined, and was sent solo in, did I say 19th February? I just checked, 19th February 1983 by Dave Fraser, who I think some of you probably know or knew. I carried on, progressed on to the K8, and the club at that time I think had 3 K8s. That's one of them, and there's another 2 in that shot. And I think probably the only person who might recognise it, Brian, the car, that was my heap of junk at the time. I don't know if you recall that. That's the only reason that I put that in, just to show that off. The club also had a couple of Slingsby Sport Vegas, one of the early glass fibre single-seaters. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any photographs of them in my collection, but I did find that, which is me flying one. You can see I haven't changed much since then. At the time, I did the bronze. There was no cross-country endorsement. I managed to complete silver height and silver duration, but there was no. I felt there was no sort of structured training for cross-country, no lectures like we have the ones today, SANS organised, things like that. It was very much just a case of finding somebody who'd done it before as an instructor and was able to teach you a bit. Field landing practice was in the Motor Falk, did a few trips in that. Club also had at that time, for a short while, a 2-seat Janus. There was a few cross countries done in that as training, and in due course the club was able to use the Scottish Gliding Association Ash 25. Once these 2 characters, whom you may recognise, had figured out how to put it together. I think that's Brian and Colin on the first day arrived at the club. You see Brian there on the right-hand side, with the manual, obviously telling Colin what he's got to do in the rear cockpit. So I had an opportunity to fly in that a couple of times, but never any sort of serious cross-country or anything like that, which I know was its intention. Ultimately, I ended up being able to fly an Asteer, and having done a few trips in the Falk, a couple of trips with 1 or 2 instructors who seemed to know what they were doing, I felt that I was ready to go cross-country in the Asteer. So one fine day, I set off in the Asteer, sure I knew what I was doing, and ended up the other side of the motorway in a field. Total distance about 10 kilometres. At that point, fine, regroup, undaunted, know where I went wrong. So have another go. This time I got as far as Dollar. Total distance so far, cross-country flying, 35 kilometres, I think it was, the 2 of them. And at that point, I think as Sam said, family, career, etc., sort of took over, and I basically stopped gliding and went off and did other things. In due course, flying, I'm still keen to go flying. Took the decision that as we lived 5 minutes from Edinburgh Airport, I would do a power license because I felt it was less time consuming. Ended up flying various power aircraft out of Edinburgh for a couple of years. I believe that I'm the last person ever to have done a first solo out of Edinburgh Airport. it became very unfriendly to light aviation not long afterwards, and that was it. But did a few good trips to sort of Mull, places like that. But eventually there's only so many times you can go to Glenrothes or Cumbernauld or Dundee for a cup of coffee and then come back. So that kind of drifted away. And I ultimately decided that I was actually going to sort of see what else might be available in terms of interesting flying. And ended up doing a fair bit of flying up at Loch Ernhead in the seaplane. I think Jamie Furnell and Neil Gregory, who are behind this Portmoak Heritage Collection, did a fair bit of flying with both of them up there. And if I'm honest, it had to be some of the most fun flying I have ever done. It was just so completely different from anything that I had done previously. As you can see, lots of fun. I also took the opportunity to do a bit of gliding when we were traveling. Any opportunity arose, I would try and see if there's a place I could fly. And a few years back, we ended up in New Zealand. And I took the opportunity to go to Omarama, which is, I think, supposed to Mecca for gliding down there. That is the forecast that greeted us on the day that I had booked to fly. Soaring conditions, non-existent, thermals none, ridge none, convergence none, wave none. Typical day in Scotland. But that was, I just thought I'd throw that one in to sort of let you see. And ultimately, in the middle of lockdown, when we came back from New Zealand, I had the opportunity to take early retirement and did so, and decided that the one thing I was going to do was go back and carry on gliding. And as Sant said, about 18 months ago, I came back, joined the club, and went solo again. And that's just a random picture of the hill plus a couple of gliders, not specifically on the day that I went solo again. But that was the that. I decided when I came back that I wanted to complete, I really just wanted to go solo and complete my silver. I'd done the height, done the duration. I just needed to get the 50K. So that was a good challenge. So I figured that the best way to do it was, I was feeling there was a bit more opportunities for training, practical experience, things like that. And I was hoping to take part in the cross-country development week last Easter, but unfortunately it coincided with my 30th wedding anniversary. And despite that being my wedding cake, both myself and my wife were members of the club at the time. I figured that it was probably not a good idea to come up and spend the week of my 30th wedding anniversary here. So I didn't. Instead, took part in the Interclub League in the intermediate class with Andy Parish. And we did, I think it was about 80 kilometres round sort of Dunblane, Crieff, up towards Methven and back, ultimately ending up in a field just outside Dunning. But I realised that even having just done that limited cross country, where it was 80, 90 kilometres, this was actually something a bit different. And I certainly was hoping to do more than just a 50K and get much more involved. So that's really the background to what I've done, why I wanted to get much more involved. And when the opportunity came to take part in the two-seater competition at Pocklington, I jumped at it. So moving on to the competition itself. First thing, I had to buy a new chart. That's the point Ron was making earlier. You know, you go in your competition and it's a whole different ballgame as to where you're going. You can't use the one that you use at Portmoak. But just for those of you who are not familiar with the area, just the setting, we've got Pocklington here, where the competition was based, just to the east of York. A1 coming down here, ideal for access, towing the trailer. Sutton Bank up here, bit of a sort of military area of intense aerial activity. The bases up there, keep clear of. And for those more interested in the historic stuff, Kirby Moorside, where Slingsby sailplanes were based, was up there. The airfield itself, typical Second World War airfield that's been sort of reclaimed for civilian use. The club, as I understand it, owns the runways plus most of the grass surrounding it. There are new grass runways to the side of the old concrete ones, which I think are pretty much unlandable. I don't know, Brian, if you've... It didn't look it to me, but yeah. Yeah, that was assault. But certainly the grass, from from my perspective, seemed absolutely fine. Clubhouse, caravan park, etc. down here, and the village of Pocklington up there. So that kind of sets the scene. A couple of other photographs just of the airfield. That's the competition glider staked out. I think that was taken towards the end actually, but staked out outside the clubhouse, most of them. And that's the Perkoz, just having been rigged and staked out. And similarly, that's it. You can just parked out there. The first day of the competition, we went down the Saturday, rigged, and got ready. And one of the things that we didn't have with us, myself and Andy, who was doing the coaching, we didn't have a crew at all. Brian was there flying, Fiona was there as well, but they weren't our crew or anything like that. So on recommendation of Andy, we spent the evening in the bar buying the odd drink, just in case anybody had to come and fetch us. So that was the first day. Second day, this is the Sunday. We had the opening first briefing. The opening of the competition was joined by the Deputy Mayor of Pocklington, who gave a short speech welcoming everybody. And it was clear to me from that the local council, Pocklington, the town, welcomed the airfield and the gliding club being there. They were good neighbours. They brought people in. Was seen as a good thing. Then, once the mayor had given his speech, there was a briefing from the competition directors about the local area, local competition rules, and the like, just about the airfield, and then went on to the task briefing for the day. That is the briefing sheet for the first day. Now, this was all completely new to me. I'd seen the one that we'd used in the Inter-Club League, but beyond that, I really wasn't familiar with these. I'm assuming, and again, Brian, you may be able to comment, presumably there's some sort of computer program that you can generate these with and provide all the details. But basically, we got the task information, six points, 6 turn points, starting at Pocklington up to Castle Howard, just outside Sutton Bank, village Tontine there, Langtoft, Humber Bridge, up to Malden and Pocklington. And it was up to the individual pilots in the competition how many of those turn points you actually went round. Didn't have to declare in advance which task you were going, but you had to start with the first one and work your way around as much as you decided you wanted to, and if possible, head back to Pocklington. Also useful information on the sheet, sort of radio frequencies, telephone numbers if you land out. Very brief summary of NOTAMs in plain English, although the expectation was that everybody would have checked all the NOTAMs themselves beforehand. That might make it slightly easier to see. What I've done there is I've put the whole suggested task onto the left-hand one based on the task sheet, and on the right-hand side one, I've put the actual task that Andy and I flew in the Perkoz. We ended up, rather than going all the way down to the Humber Bridge, which is there, back up to Malton, somewhere up there, and back down to Pocklington. We stopped there and just cut across to Pocklington itself. And I think Brian will talk about it later, but... Oh.
Just a quick question whilst you've got that slide up on the screen there. If you were to fly around all 6 turning points, what would have been the total task distance?
Hang on. It should be 253, yes. So as I say, we Andy and I, well, I say Andy and I, really Andy decided that we were going to self-brief effectively for the slightly shorter task on the right-hand side. So having briefed, we set out to the grid, and that is one of the days. I don't think it was the first one, but it was just to give you an idea of what the grid being set up looked like. Each glider was allocated a row in the grid. So on the first day was row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 3 gliders in each row. And then on the second day, the first row moved right to the back and everybody else moved up one to try and even up the opportunities to sort of get the best bit of the day. I think, is that right? I'm looking at Brian here. That's right, isn't it? You do it. Yeah. Total, I think it was about 31 gliders competing and 5 tugs, getting them all launched within less than an hour. And that's Andy and me just sort of sitting, waiting, ready to go. Now, what I'm going to try and do is we'll get rid of that for a minute. And let's. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think that's right. What I was then going to do was just try and talk you through using the trace overlaid onto the task. Just try and talk you through what we did, what I think I learned, and the like, and then Brian will sort of chip in with some comments perhaps on his trace doing similar task, but the extra bits. Oh. It should. Strange. Does it? I'm trying to call this up using Microsoft Edge. I'm trying to show it. Is it?
Oh, he gets the
You get that? All right. Maybe that's not going to work as I'd hoped for. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, it was. I would obviously, for whatever reason, the technology. What I'd been hoping to do was actually show you the trace and fly around it, using the BGA ladder software, showing the from the trace, but I obviously can't for some reason. But I'll just try and talk you through this screen grab that I took earlier of it, just in case something like that happened. Start here at Pocklington, start sector, 180 degrees, effectively south of the track. Launch was to 2,000 feet, dropped off tow just about here, a little bit north of the start sector. And the start, it was not, again, correct me if I've got this wrong, Brian, it was not what's referred to as a held start, where everybody has to get airborne before anybody can start. We were free to start at any point once you were in the air. So what we did. Yeah. So we dropped off tow about here, 2,000 feet, straight into a thermal. And if I'd been on my own, my instinct would have been to head straight off on track to Castle Howard up there. That would have been a mistake for a couple of reasons. One, at that point, we climbed thermal 4,000 feet straight off tow. And so I would have probably just headed straight off. A couple of things would have been a mistake. One, we hadn't gone through the start sector. We were north of it. And also, we were one of the first to launch, so we'd have nobody ahead of us marking thermals. So Andy's advice was, we'll just stooge around here for a bit, over there for a bit, and then we'll duck back down through the start sector after about 20 minutes, half an hour, which we did. And we came through about there. And the other thing I probably would have done, even if I had gone through the start sector, I'd have gone there, straight up on track. But again, because we've got a wind coming from that direction, Andy's advice was, if you start out here, which you can do, you hit your first thermal up there and you get drifted onto track. So again, that's the sort of thing that just wouldn't have occurred to me if I'd gone on my own to a competition as a solo pilot without any real experience. I'd have just made lots of mistakes, even in the first 20 minutes. We then meandered up to the first turn point at Castle Howard, picking up the thermals on the way. I had hoped to show you with the other trace that I was going to show you the difference between my thermals and Andy's, but it's not that clear on there. His were the nice, compact, tight, neat ones. Mine's were sort of all over the place, the circles. But again, that got better, and I could still hear one of the things Andy was telling me all the time is turn tighter once you're in the core. Next step, Castle Howard, then up to the Sutton Bank turn point here. Sutton Bank Airfield is somewhere up about here on the moors. And then we went up to Tontine here, which was a wee village. And then it was at this point, I think we were about 2,500 feet there, and we had the North Yorkshire moors to about there to cross. Again, if I'd been on my own, I'd have said no thanks. It was just a little bit too far for me, but Andy was quite comfortable that we had the height to get to the other side where it would drop off, and we pick something up the other side if necessary, or we could sort of turn back and come down there that way. But at the end, we picked up a great thermal right in the middle of the moors about there, ended up with about 5,000 feet, plenty of height in hand. Carried on down track, and there's a big blue hole out here, so we diverted off, pick up a thermal here. There's another one there, another thermal right there on the final turning point on there, and then just headed straight for home, coming in with about 2,000 feet to spare. But because it was the first time I'd ever experienced anything like that, I think we just took it very, very gently, and I sort of meandered around, following Andy's instructions, guidance, asking questions, and taking on board all his advice. Ultimately, on that day, I get the numbers. Did a total distance 163 kilometers at an average speed of 62 kilometers an hour, allowing us to finish the day in 17th place. And that gave it a total of 1,207 points. I don't know if you want to add anything specific at that point to your different experience. I'm not quite sure if would it would
bring up the slide with the task map. Yeah, that would do that. Quickly describe my flight. You got the pointer as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, Fiona and I normally fly competitions together, but we just got into a new glider, Tango 3, last year, and it was having problems with the engine not running properly. It was basically running about 500 RPM low. So when you started the engine, you descended. So it actually wasn't much use at all. So we arrived down there with a glider with an engine that wasn't reliable or wasn't going to give us a climb with a caravan and 2 dogs. So I really didn't want to land out. So Fiona kindly volunteered to stay on the ground and look after the dogs. But I still didn't fancy landing out. So I decided to fly solo and fly very cautiously, try not to get low. The main thing for me, not to land out. So the competition started, as Andrew said, Pocklington up to Castle Howard. And one of the big differences for people that have flown competitions, Pocklington, you don't have a held start. So you can start more or less straight away. And it's good and bad. It stops all the gaggling before a start. But on the other hand, if you're at the back of the grid and it's a day that's deteriorating and you listen to everyone else starting and you're still on the ground, it's quite depressing. Also, the maximum start height's normally 1,000 foot above cloud base, except at Pocklington, it's usually way below cloud base for some weird reason. Cloud base that day was going up to about 5,000 feet later on. I think the maximum start height was 3.5 or
I think
so.
we talked about that earlier, and we think
Yeah.
we decided that's what it had been. Yeah, 3.5 was maximum start height.
So I decided I didn't want to get much below about 1,500 feet. If I got to 1,500 feet, I would start the engine. Hopefully it'd give me enough to get to a decent area, slowly descending. So that was my main tactic. So started about 3,500 feet. It was fairly weak to start with. And then once you got up to Castle Howard, it started to get better. And you could see good clouds ahead up towards Sutton Bank. And the climbs were maybe 4 or 5 knots at times by then, going up to about 5,000 feet. So you could really start motoring on. So I was cruising at about 80 odd knots up towards Sutton Bank, then Toynton. One of the interesting points on this sort of task, because you don't have to go around every turning point, and even quite experienced people get caught out with this. For example, if you'd gone from Pocklington to Castle Howard to Sutton Bank and come back, this sector moves round to the north. So the best thing to do is always go into the barrel, the half-kilometre barrel, and then you don't get caught out. Richard Large got caught out with that this year. Yeah, it's so easy to do. People just forget at times. So always aim to just go into the barrel, and then that's not a problem. And obviously in a higher performance glider, you really need to get round all of the turning points if you want to get decent points. It was quite good up to Toynton, and then you could see it was starting to kind of overdevelop over the North Yorkshire moors. So I slowed down a bit and was taking some weaker climbs, and then it became blue. But there were 1 or 2 decent thermals in the blue, and you could see, was it Longtoft or what's it called?
Langtoft.
Langtoft. Yeah, I could see a nice little cloud building just past the turning point. So I went past it and got a really good climb, about 5,500 feet. And then, of course, the next turning point, the far side of the Humber. Why would you choose a turning point there? I remember the task setter saying he'd always wanted to use it. So he thought it had never been used. So he thought he'd just stick it in this day. And it was totally blue down here and part of the way up again. So my thought was if I could get there about 3,500 feet, I could maybe glide back into the decent conditions. And as it happened, I got a couple of decent climbs and managed to get round the Humber about 4,500 feet. I got a good climb here, and I was on final glide by halfway up this leg, but I could see it looked like rain coming in from the southwest, so I didn't want to be flying down towards Pocklington into a wind in the rain. So I took a couple of silly little climbs and ended up with a glide angle of about 20 to 1 or 19 to 1 to get in. So I wasted a huge load of time coming back, but I still ended up about 6th or 7th for the day. And I think one of the things to learn from these comps, if you finish in about the top half dozen every day, you're probably going to be in the top 2 or 3 at least. You can't afford to have a bad day. And it was interesting, a couple of the guys with the Eagles did very well in a couple of days, got about 2,500 points, and then they had a couple of bad days, and you can't recover from that. And another thing about the scoring at Pocklington, it's based on the BJ ladder, so you have more than 1,000 point days, so you can get 2,000 points plus on a good day. Anyway, that about covers that flight.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think you'd said on the sort of Sutton Bank, like at the Castle Howard Sutton Bank leg, you were sort of doing about 80 knots. I think you sort of steamed past us in the Perkoz.
Yeah, I think we saw you. I saw you at that.
I think you started after us and sort of obviously caught us up. I can't remember whether you sort of got down as far as Humber and back and landed before we did. I can't remember which way around it was, but
it's always nice to catch people. It's not nice when you get caught.
Yeah,
that's very depressing.
See him waving.
First of all, congratulations on being second in the comp overall. That was a good effort. But I'd like to ask, how many points were you behind the winner of the comp at the end of the comp?
80.
At the end, about something like 80 or
It's 80.
so it was
Right.
a few minutes.
Yeah.
So basically,
So-
if I hadn't taken these last climbs on that, well, that's how it could be. So you kick yourself afterwards, but on the other hand, if you land out just short, you lose a lot of your speed points. So the main thing is consistency. The main thing is to get round, particularly at a higher performance glider.
I think Brian's point about consistency. I think Brian's point about consistency is really, when we're talking about competition flying, you don't have to come first or even second, but if you're third every day, you're going to win.
Almost certain if you're third every day. And the idea is to win the competition, not just win a day. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Brian. I think that's a useful comparison. Go back to where we were. The other thing, I think one of the other advantages of flying two-seater competition was that, as well as all the coaching and guidance and experience and all the rest of it that I got from Andy, it meant that we could share the flying, and there was a bit of an opportunity for sightseeing along the way. That's, in fact, if you look at that with that Brian passing us on the other side of the wing doing 80 knots, that's Sutton Bank, the Horse and the Sutton Bank airfields just there, and the moors behind that I was a bit nervous about crossing. And what was the other one? Yeah, and that is, we just crossed the moor, and that's the village of Kirby Moorside, which I pointed out earlier, where the Slingsby gliders came from.
Can I make a point of that? I mean, this, we've been talking today about, flying, going on competitions down south, compared to trying to do cross countries up here. I mean, we have our advantages and disadvantages, but I mean, just looking at that photograph, I mean, from the point of view of landing fields, I mean, I look at that and I sort of think, well, there's no problem really. You just got to look at it. I mean, there's lots of landable fields. And this is a great advantage about flying down south. I mean, obviously, you've got to think about the time of year, but really, you can fly down there and you can have confidence that as long as you're reasonably experienced as far as, being able to spot land, as we've been discussing today, you're really presented with quite an opportunity. And it is good to go down south to build up experience. Sorry,
okay. No problem. I wasn't going to go through all the other days in any sort of great detail, but I thought I would just jump ahead to the Saturday when this task was set. Starting, hang on, will I get me? Oh, looks different. Yeah, starting at Pocklington, out to Beverley here, down to Burton-on-Staither, and then ultimately all the way down to Beaver, down the south, and then back up that way. And one of the intermediate term points was this one here, Gainsborough. We went in doing task D, listed here, Pocklington, Beverley, Burton-on-Staither, Gainsborough, Newark, Pocklington. So back all the way down to here and back up to Pocklington, basically, via the turn point at Gainsborough. I'm assuming, Brian, you went all the way down and back, yeah. And the other thing I'm assuming, Brian, you did was, leave that, you didn't miss the Gainsborough turn point. At first sight, it looks like we hit the Gainsborough turn point, but that's actually our track back north, having been down to Newark. On the way south, we just missed it by, I think it was a few hundred yards. I'll take the blame for that one entirely, because I'm not sure whether I was relying on XC Soar on my phone, or whether I just missed it, or there was a problem with the phone, or whether I was distracted by what I take it was a nice juicy thermal here and went out that way. But anyway, we missed it completely, went all the way down to Newark, came back up, and fortuitously went back through the turn point on the way north. But that meant that essentially I think it was about 30 kilometers down to Newark, 30 kilometers back. That didn't count. And we'd also spent an hour doing that extra 60 kilometers. And we only got scored for task C, which was down to Gainsborough and back up. We were also fortunate in that if we hadn't diverted off track for that thermal there and then gone back that way, instead, if we'd gone and found a thermal across that way, we'd have missed it completely and done even worse. ultimately, I think we ended up being 29th out of 31 on that day. But the point really there was all the electronics in the world, if you're not reading it properly, you make a mistake, don't understand it. I was still getting to grips with it. I did spend some time with Andy in the evenings just going through XC Source, setting it up and all the rest of it, getting his take on what the best settings to use were. But ultimately, I missed it. And it would have been better if I had actually noted exactly what the turn point was on the ground, looked for the specific turn point on the ground, and wouldn't have missed it. And that's the task sheet for the final day, which you will note has my handwritten notes on it of the exact details of the turn points. The first one was a Y junction just east of the village. I wasn't going to make that mistake twice. Unfortunately, that was actually the last day, and although we briefed and went out onto the grid, sat around for quite a while, conditions didn't develop as anticipated, and it was scrubbed about 1 o'clock to allow people time to sort of get de-rigged, sorted out, and head home. How many days did you fly? There was a total of 4 competition days. Every day we were there was flyable, whether it was for local soaring or I think there was some dissension in the ranks, is that the right word, Brian, about some of the tasks that were scrubbed.
We could have had 7 days out of 8. That last day, Andy was talking about. On the last day, quite a few people flew around the task at fairly fast speeds after they scrubbed it.
Yeah.
But I went for a flight with Derek Taylor because we were still trying to fault find with the engine on that day, and it was really good. Went straight into an 8-knot thermal up to 4,500 feet, and they scrubbed the day.
Yeah, I mean,
it's always difficult being a competition director and getting everything right. So.
The task on the last day was pretty compact, starting sort of Pocklington in the middle, and basically all the turn points were within 30-40 kilometres. So anybody who did land out wouldn't be landing out a long way away and could get back quickly. But as Brian said, it turned out to be not a bad day after all, despite having been scrubbed. And I think that's the view onto the first leg, just when we were sort of starting to, I think that was just after the cancellation of the day had been announced, and we were just starting to sort of pull the gliders away, but that was what it looked like on the day. The rest of well, in this section, the pictures I've got are more, it sounds like my holiday slides actually, or pictures, but I've just got a selection really just to try and give you a feel for what the sort of atmosphere was on site. And although there were good, nice looking days, there were some pretty grim ones. I think that was taken pretty early, one of the mornings, that there was no competition flying, but sort of 88's cloud cover. That one I actually included specifically for the point, I was about to say for the point Sant made, but he's disappeared, about the landable fields being there. I mean, you know, with the best will in the world, there's probably only about 3 fields there in that picture that you probably couldn't get a glider down into. No need to worry about slopes or anything like that. Yeah. I was just, since you're back, Sant, I was just showing that one. I was going to make exactly the same point you made about fields and the availability of them. That was just a slightly random one, just showing how many of them there were down south.
Late August was one of the best times to do competitions because there's fields everywhere. You really don't have to worry about field landing in England because all the crops cut.
Having said that, you know, while saying that you know, there are a lot of fields down south. I mean, the problem that we have in Scotland is that basically the good lift is in the mountains, and you know, we actually have a really landable area all the way up to Fordoon, all the way down to Balmahal. The problem is that that's not a particularly good soaring area, but for a variety of reasons, you know, it being Scotland and all the rest of it. And so we do actually have a landable area, but unfortunately the soaring conditions, let's put it this way, it's a lot better in the mountains than it is in the lowlands. Whereas down south, because the temperatures are higher and all the rest of it, right, you know, amount of rainfall and so on, it is, you know, better thermal conditions. I mean, we do have exceptional conditions in Scotland at times, not last year, but the point I'm trying to make is that unfortunately, where it is really quite easy from a landable point of view, it's actually not that soarable. We do get soarable days, but it's not that soarable. I mean, that's the point I'd like to make. Any questions? Any other questions at all?
I've still got a few not finished.
Oh,
yet.
you've got a few more to go. I do apologise. Yeah, sorry.
That again is just a nice picture of the Perkoz that somebody was sharing a thermal with us, took, and was kind enough to pass on. That one, yeah, that is a picture that I took, again, sharing the flying means you can do things like that without worrying too about it. Is the city of Lincoln there on the trip back from Newark where we missed the Gainsborough turn point. And the reason I've put that one in is that I spend a fair bit of time travelling up and down the A1 between Edinburgh, York, Lincoln and back. And I sort of, not astonishment, that's not the right word, but it was a real sense of achievement to be able to fly from York to Lincoln and back, total distance of whatever it was, about 90 kilometres, and just to have done that without needing to drive or anything like that. As that was really taken by the fact that we'd bypassed Lincoln completely without any great effort. And that's just the sort of thing that, you know, if you're flying in a two-seater, you can enjoy the scenery. Couple of final random ones on the competition. The opportunity arose to fly on the non-competition days. I know Andy took a few of the locals up in the Perkoz, a couple of chaps from Poland who were keen to fly their Polish-built glider and things like that. So it was just to show again, it's the sort of thing we can do. And that that's actually right next to the airfield. And my view is that would make a fabulous clubhouse. The only problem is it's an old folks' home, but I can actually see, I was actually looking around me, I can see the advantage of just having a little gate and you can just... yeah. And somebody was asking about the vintage. I think that was just the two Slingsby Eagles and a capstan just at the far side. And I think they seem to have acquitted themselves fairly well. Finally, that was sort of just the Perkoz packed up in its box, ready to come home. And just on the competition itself, one final thing, that's Alan Rams and Mike Geordie, the competition directors, handing over a cheque to the Yorkshire Air Ambulance for, I think it was about £1,300 that was collected during the week from sort of competitors. Was taking part in the odd fine here and there, and a similar cheque went to the Motor Neurone Disease Association. So it was just, I suppose, to give you a feel for the sort of competition it is, that there was people coming around with buckets collecting for their local favoured charities. So I just had a few further pictures I was going to show. Sant said to me, people like pictures, so I've produced lots of them. But does anybody have anything you want to sort of ask on the competition itself before I move on? Comprehensively covered. Good. Right. My own plans, as I said, I originally came back just with the intention of re-soloing and completing my 50k. And about this time last year, I signed up for the Club K6 Syndicate. This was left to the club for use of members by John McShane, and as a low-cost way to get some fun flying and to encourage those who perhaps didn't have the resources. And I saw it, I'd never flown a K6, and I saw it as an opportunity to fly something I'd never flown before. So I signed up for that. Unfortunately, and maybe this is a warning for some people, I didn't check what the maximum cockpit weight was. It's 100 kilograms, and I'm not. So I've just recently taken on board, I haven't signed the paperwork yet, but half share with Alex Maitland in his Vega. Planning to get sort of up to speed with that and have some fun with it this summer. Also, I'd like to finish doing some aerobatics, which I did last year. And I guess most people around here have got an aviation or flying bucket list. And quite a few people over the years, I suspect, flying in one of the two-seat Spitfires is one of them. Now, until 3 weeks ago, that was on my bucket list. I now have that on my bucket list. Thanks to Rainer's talk last week and the discovery that you can get a trial lesson in it for what I think is roughly the same price as a flight in the Spitfire. So I'll be in touch with you about that in due course, maybe. So finally, the next two-seater competition at Pocklington, just been announced, 20th to 28th of August. Plan is that Ron is going to take the Perkoz down with a couple of members. Already one signed up. And so there's another space available if you're interested in going, which I would thoroughly recommend. Get in touch with the office as soon as possible. And if there's enough demand and we can find another coach, hopefully a second two-seater would go down as well and make it a bit of a mini club expedition. So if you are interested, get in touch with the office and you can add your details to the Perkoz trailer expedition list. Hopefully that will get longer as the years go on. And the other thing I was just going to finally finish off with, for non-flying days, or if you're thinking of taking family who might not be flying and looking to know what's around in the Pocklington area. I knew York very well, but I'd never actually really explored the area around it. So on the non-flying days, I just sort of took myself off and did a bit of exploring. And it's just a few pictures of some of the stuff that is in the area. That's 5 minutes walk from the airfield. There's a canal basin. Lots of nice little villages. I think that's Pickering. I also took myself off up to Sutton Bank, 45-minute drive, had a flight up there, never flown from there before. If you're interested in airfield architecture, it's got some fabulous hangars at Sutton Bank, well worth a look. And that was the sunset on the drive back from Sutton Bank, big sky country. And there's also the Elvington Air Museum, about 20-minute drive from Pocklington. Lots of interesting stuff there. George Cayley's, I forget what it's called, but that's the replica that Derek Piggott flew back in the 70s, and various other things. Lots of interesting aircraft. And that, I think, is all I had to say, other than to say I had a fabulous time at the competition, really enjoyed it, learned a hell of a lot. Looking forward to doing more cross-country flying. Thanks to the club for effectively letting me take the Perkoz and Andy away for a week. Thanks to the guys at the Wolds Gliding Club for organising it. And I did have somebody else I was going to thank as well. Hang on. Oh yes, and to Andy for putting up with my flying and navigation. Thank you. I hope that's been of some interest, and I would encourage anybody who's seriously interested, go and do it.